think the prophecy about Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is picturing something that is prophetic and talking about a battle that will take place in the last days where there's going to be an enemy that assaults Jerusalem and Israel and the people of God. And the passage talks about the fact that God is going to miraculously deliver His people. These nations are going to march up to fight against Israel, but there's not going to be much of a war because the Lord sends an earthquake and destroys them, and there's just going to be dead bodies scattered everywhere. Throughout church history, people have made all kinds of attempts to try to identify the armies and who they are, and typically we've identified them with whatever group we didn't particularly like at that time, or whoever our enemy at that time in church history. And so I think the purpose of this passage is not to identify these nations specifically. The name Gog seems to be a reference to an ancient Near Eastern king from Lydia whose name was Gyges. And I think Ezekiel is using this very brutal warrior as sort of a model of what the future king would be like who would lead this coalition against Israel. And so it's not, again, to identify a specific person or a specific place. It's using a king from that day as a model of the enemy who would attack Israel in the future. And Israel had experienced all kinds of attacks, and ultimately the Babylonians destroyed the city. There's going to be a war like that. The interesting thing about Gog's allies is that it mentions 7 nations. And again, prophetically, many people have tried to identify them with the nations that happen to be in that particular territory at whatever time in history we might be talking about. I think a better way to look at these nations is, again, to see them more idealistically or just as representative. These nations come from all 4 directions. They are 7 nations. And so I think what Ezekiel is envisioning for us is a worldwide attack on Israel. He's not trying to necessarily identify for us the players that are in the game, but simply giving us a vision of what this future battle would be like and giving us an assurance that when this happens, the Lord is going to defeat these enemies. Gog and Magog end up being referenced again in Revelation chapter 20, and again it's associated with the final battle, the final rebellion. Satan is released from the pit for a short time. He organizes another army that will march against God and God's people, and again the Lord is instantly going to destroy them. So I think there's prophetic significance to this. There is going to be a war and conflict of this nature, but trying to use that passage to identify who this is or what these nations or where these nations are, I really don't think that's the purpose or the intent of the passage.